Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world lit by candles and ruled by whispers. You're standing in a stone corridor, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and damp limestone. Somewhere above, a bell tolls midnight, its echo rolling through the rafters like a sigh. The flickering light catches on polished chalices and on faces bowed in silent prayer, maybe silent fear, because beneath the glow of faith, the Middle Ages were never as simple as good versus evil. They were murky, layered, alive with contradictions. And if you were alive back then, let's just say you probably wouldn't survive this week without divine intervention or a very lucky charm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the great hall of a medieval manor, and it's not the silent, reverent place movies make it seem. The air hums with life dogs scraping bones under benches, servants rushing with trenchers of steaming stew, a bard plucking a few hesitant notes. The lord at the head table lifts his goblet, and for a moment, all attention turns to him. Power radiates not from his sword, but from his ability to command silence. It's theatritual, mixed with intimidation, where every bow and every sip of wine is part of a centuries-old performance. Historians still argue whether such public feasting was truly about hospitality or simply a stage to display dominance. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. You can imagine the unease of being watched constantly, even as you eat. It's not the kind of dinner where you lick the spoon. A servant trips near the hearth, spilling a bit of broth onto the rushes. The lord doesn't shout. Instead, he stares a slow, deliberate look that makes the entire room freeze. You feel the tension, that cold silence more powerful than any curse. In the medieval mind, shame could be as dangerous as steel. One wrong move, one wrong rumor, and you're done. Religion soaks everything. A priest blesses the table with gestures that almost resemble magic sigils. In truth, faith and superstition blend so tightly here, you'd need divine scissors to cut them apart. You see candles lit for saints each, one a small plea for mercy, but also tiny charms pinned under sleeves. A bit of bone, a scrap of scripture, a pebble from a holy spring. Just in case, people whisper. It's faith with a backup plan. You pass a woman kneeling near the chapel door. She's tracing the shape of a cross on her chest, whispering something that sounds like a prayer, but could also be an incantation. The church officially forbids such mingling, yet nearly everyone does it. Historians note how even bishops quietly owned talismans against toothache or plague. When fear rules every corner, purity bends. There's a faint rustle in the corners of the hall rats, or perhaps the unseen watchers of rumor. Gossip here travels faster than the wind through the rafters. Servants trade secrets like coins, who owes whom a favor. Which noble has a lover hidden in the stables? Which pilgrim arrived with suspiciously fine boots? You can't unhear it. Every whispered word feels heavier than stone. Outside, the night deepens. You step into a courtyard, drenched in moonlight. Somewhere, an owl calls a lonely, mournful sound that makes the hair on your arms lift. You think of how people then feared the dark as something alive. Night wasn't just the absence of light. It was a present something that pressed against shutters and whispered through cracks. Candles were precious, but they were also fragile. One breath and your whole sense of safety vanished. A mainstream fact. Most medieval households kept small shrines in their rooms' candles before saints. Sometimes next to herbs hung from the rafters. Faith wasn't confined to church walls. It bled into bedrooms, kitchens, even latrines. But here's the fringe. Some families burned candle wax, mixed with animal fat, believing it would trap wandering spirits in the smoke. Imagine falling asleep to that smell, comforted and nauseated at once. You head toward the kitchen, where warmth and noise break the spell of silence. The cook-apron streaked with ashes stirs, a cauldron that smells faintly of onions and something questionable. "Dinner for 50, she mutters, and not one spoon left clean. Her voice cracks with fatigue, but her hands move like clockwork. You realize that survival here isn't about heroism, it's about repetition. It's every day the same motions, the same prayers, the same hope that tomorrow doesn't bring famine or fever. You watch her toss a pinch of salt over her shoulder. A reflex, perhaps, or an old charm against the devil lurking behind her. You smile faintly. Modern superstition still echoes that gesture. That's the thing about the Middle Ages, they never truly left us. They're stitched into our habits, hiding in the corners of our kitchens and the backs of our minds. A gust of wind slaps the shutters, and for a heartbeat, all the candles gutter out. Darkness crashes over the room like a wave. You freeze. The silence feels enormous. Someone gasps a prayer. Someone else mutters that maybe a soul just passed. Then, with trembling hands, the cook relights the nearest wick. The flame shivers back to life, small but triumphant. The whole room exhales together. You can almost feel the collective thought. We survived another moment. In that flicker, you notice the children peeking from behind a doorframe. Their eyes shine, curious and cautious. To them, the candle isn't just lights, it's protection, the thin line between safety and the endless dark. And you, standing there centuries later in imagination, realize how fragile comfort really was. One monk wrote that the devil travels best by night, through cracks in doors and the ears of the careless. You grin, an oddly poetic way of saying, keep your ears clean. But superstition gave shape to fear, and fear gave structure to daily life. Without it, chaos would have reigned. Historians still argue whether people truly believed every ghost story or simply needed them to make sense of the unknown. Either way, belief worked better than medicine. You follow the hall back toward the chapel. The air cools, and your footsteps echo in long, hollow beats. The priest is still there, extinguishing candles one by one. His face looks tired, yet serene. When you ask what he fears most, he smiles faintly. A soul without confession and mice. You almost laugh, but his tone is deadly serious. In a world of stone walls and wooden floors, mice were not only a nuisance, they were omens. Their rustling meant spoiled grain, hunger, and maybe God's displeasure. As you leave, you glance up at the ceiling, dark beams, crisscrossing like the ribs of some slumbering beast. The wax drips from the last candles, slow and rhythmic, marking time as surely as a clock. You think about how every light here must be earned, by labor, by coin, or by faith. No switch to flip, no guarantee against the dark. Just you, the flame, and whatever listens beyond the door. You can almost hear your own breath. The night outside has grown thicker. The stars, when you step into the courtyard again, look sharp enough to cut glass. Somewhere, a dog barks. Somewhere else, a woman sings softly a lullaby that sounds older than the stones beneath your feet. The words mean nothing to you, yet the melody seeps into your chest, steadying your pulse. It's easy to romanticize this age, to imagine gallant knights and pure-hearted maidens, but up close. The truth is messier, more human. People gossiped, joked, lied, and prayed in the same breath. They feared the dark, yet worked within it. They broke rules while clutching their rosaries. That tension, that blend of sin and sanctity, was the heartbeat of the Middle Ages. As you linger there, candlelight still dancing behind your eyes, you realize how similar we still are. We still whisper our worries to invisible force, call them algorithms, fate, or fortune. We still crave a small light to hold back the unknown. And though the world's moved on from castles and cloisters, the flicker of that old fear still burns quietly inside us. A gust of wind passes, and the last candle in the hall gutters out. The flame dies, but the scent of warm wax lingers. Somewhere deep inside, you feel the weight of 1,000 untold stories pressing close, patient as the dark itself. And the truth behind all those legends' heroes, saints, sinners isn't that they conquered fear, but that they learned to live inside it. You take one last look at the silent hall, then turn toward the faint light of dawn creeping between the stones. The Middle Ages aren't gone there simply asleep beneath the candlelight, waiting for you to notice their breath. The morning creeps in slow and gray, seeping through arrow slits and dust-misted glass like a tired ghost. You step outside, rubbing warmth into your hands as the first clang of the market bell splits the chill. The village around the manor is already stirring hooves in the mud, vendors shouting prices. The smell of smoke curling from hearths that haven't gone cold since last night. You follow the noise downhill where the heartbeat of the medieval world thrums strongest, the marketplace. Forget shiny royal banquets, this is where life actually happens. It's not glamorous. It's noisy, messy, and wonderfully alive. You pass a butcher's stall, and your modern stomach recoils a little. Nothing's wrapped in plastic here, just meat, swinging from hooks, glistening in the morning light. The butcher's apron looks like it's seen a few centuries already. Next to him, a woman sells bread so dense it could double as a defensive weapon. And then there's the sound bells clinking, chickens protesting, someone laughing at a dirty joke you can't quite catch. You step carefully. The ground's a patchwork of straw and something suspiciously organic. You won't find any scented candles here, unless the scent you want is smoked eel and anxiety. Yet, under all that chaos, there's a strange order. The market is its own small kingdom, with unwritten rules everyone follows. Merchants shout prices, but also blessings, because words carry power. Saint Margaret, keep your purse safe, one cries as a buyer passes. Another mutters under his breath, and you catch a whisper of something that sounds like a spell but might just be creative accounting. Historians still argue whether markets were centers of community or engines of corruption. In truth, they were both. Commerce was freedom, but also temptation. Here, you could buy everything from a new kettle to a saint's finger bone, though the authenticity of that relic might depend on how gullible you looked. You pause by a stall where a man in a patched cloak sells tiny glass vials. He swears they hold holy water from Jerusalem. The labels are written in what looks suspiciously like chicken scratch Latin. You ask what proof he has? He grins, showing a single gold tooth. You still breathing after you drink. That's proof enough. You can't help but laugh. One mainstream fact. Medieval markets often served as the news network of the age. Without newspapers, word of wars, plagues, and royal marriages spread through traders' tongues. In a sense, gossip was the world's first social media fast, unreliable, and occasionally catastrophic. You imagine the day someone accidentally announced a dead king who was very much alive. Somewhere, a rumor grew faster than a crop. Near the square center, you find a woman selling herbs and powders. Her hands move gracefully over small bundles of sage, rosemary, and dried foxglove. She looks harmless, but you notice how people give her a wide berth. She's the local healer or, depending on who's talking, the local witch. You watch her weigh a mixture carefully, lips moving as if in silent prayer. Need luck, traveler? She asks, voice low. Or protection from bad dreams? You hesitate? It's all play, you think. Until she adds, you've been wandering lately hard roads in your sleep. You freeze a little. Coincidence or intuition? She smiles knowingly. The herbs remember things, she says, wrapping a small charm in cloth. But don't let the priest see it. You thank her and move on, the charm warm in your palm. Maybe it's placebo, maybe something older. Historians still argue whether folk healers truly believed in their magic or simply played a part for survival. Either way, belief itself was a kind of medicine. As the sun climbs higher, you realize how much of the market runs on illusion. Not lies, exactly just carefully managed perception. The baker tells stories of blessed grain from the bishop's lands. The blacksmith swears his iron never rusts because it was cooled in holy water. Even the fishmonger claims his eels sing psalms when boiled. You can't tell if he's joking. Probably not. A fringe tidbit. Some towns held silence hours where traders were forbidden to haggle loudly, meant to let prayers or court announcements pass through. Of course, no one stayed quiet. It became a game, people miming prices with dramatic gestures until someone inevitably burst out laughing and paid the fine in bread. You stop at a table covered in tiny carved figures. A boy sells them saints, knights, and even a dragon or two. "My father makes them," he says proudly, though his eyes dart toward a man arguing over taxes nearby. You buy one, a small knight, the paint chipped but the expression surprisingly fierce. "He'll keep your path safe," the boy says, "unless he's drunk." Sometimes he falls over. You grin. Even in the Middle Ages, humor finds its way through the cracks. The bell rings again, signaling midday. The smell of roasting chestnuts and onions fills the air, making your stomach growl. You grab a cup of ale that tastes like vinegar, pretending to be beer. The merchant insists it's the finest brew this side of the monastery. You're not convinced, but you drink anyway because that's what everyone does, find comfort where they can, even if it's questionable. Somewhere behind you, a preacher begins shouting. His voice cuts through the laughter, warning of sin, greed, and the end of days. People half listen. Few cross themselves. A few roll their eyes. The market doesn't stop. Life doesn't stop. Even apocalypse announcements must wait their turn behind bread sales. You notice a cloaked figure standing by the church gate, watching. Not selling, not buying, just observing. He nods once when your eyes meet, then disappears into the crowd. Maybe a tax collector, maybe a spy. Maybe just a man with nothing left to trade but secrets. The Middle Ages thrived on such figures, those who lived between worlds, part truth, part rumor. We wander toward the back of the market, where the stalls thin and the ground turns soft underfoot. This is where the less official trades happen. Love potions, banned books, bits of relics that didn't quite pass inspection. A woman with sharp eyes and sharper teeth offers to sell you the whisper of a saint, a feather wrapped in cloth. She leans close and says, "If you listen to it, you'll hear what you need to hear." You raise an eyebrow, and if I don't, she shrugs. Then maybe you weren't meant to. It's absurd, yet oddly comforting. Humans will always find meaning, even if they have to invent it. You tuck the feather away next to your herb charm. A shout breaks through the air, someone accused of cheating waits. The crowd gathers fast, hungry for spectacle. The accused, a young man with trembling hands, swears he's innocent. The market judge, an old merchant with a nose like a hawk's beak, inspects the scales. After a moment's silence, he declares the weight's fair. The crowd disperses, disappointed. No punishment today. You realize how thin the line is between justice and entertainment here. You pause near the fountain, watching the sunlight ripple across the water's surface. Coins glint below, offerings tossed to saints or luck, depending on who you ask. You toss one in yourself, it lands with a soft plunk. You don't make a wish, you just listen to the echo fade. For a brief second, everything quiets. Even the chaos seems to hold its breath. But then a donkey brays somewhere behind you, breaking the spell. You can't help but laugh. Serenity never lasts long in the Middle Ages. As afternoon bleeds into gold, the marketplace begins to shift tone. Traders grow weary, voices crack, bargains grow desperate. The smell of spilt ale and trampled herbs fills the square. Children chase one another with sticks. Dogs scavenge under carts. Somewhere, a lute begins to play a tune you almost recognize, a melody that feels timeless, like something your grandparents might hum without knowing why. And that's the strange beauty of this world. Beneath all the noise and superstition, it hums with continuity. The market's rhythm, buy, sell, argue, laugh isn't so different from ours. The goods have changed, but the pulse hasn't. As you walk back toward the manor road, you glance over your shoulder. The stalls glow in the fading light, the candles flickering to life, one by one. You realize how much the day depended on those little flame symbols of order, safety, and maybe hope. Just as they did in the hall last night. A cool breeze carries the last shouts of vendors down the hill. You can still hear them bartering for the final coin, the final loaf, as though silence itself were too expensive to afford. And as the market shutters close, the real business of night begins. Rumors exchanged in whispers. Debts settled in shadows, and prayers whispered to both God and the ghosts that never quite left. You feel the weight of the charm in your pocket and wonder, if you'd truly lived here, would you have bought it? Maybe, yes. Because in a world of disease and famine and fire, you'd cling to any fragment of luck that promised a little peace. Maybe that's why people kept coming to the market, week after week, not just for goods, but for reassurance that the world still spun, that life still traded hands. The stars begin to prick the sky again, faint but insistent. The crowd thins, the laughter fades, and the last candle flickers in a glass jar by a shuttered stall. You walk past it, your reflection trembling in the flame. For a heartbeat, you feel like one of them, half believer, half skeptic, fully human, caught between faith and doubt. You leave the square behind, the sound of distant bells folding into the dark. Tomorrow the market will return, the gossip will renew, and the world will keep turning one whispered bargain at a time. You wake to the muffled sound of bells again, though this time the echo carries differently, deeper, slower, more solemn. The air smells of wax and cold stone. You've wandered somehow into the walled heart of the medieval world, a monastery. The outside world hums with barter and laughter, but in here, every sound seems to bow its head. You move through an arched doorway where light filters through stained glass, painting the floor in trembling patches of blue and red. The stones are worn smooth by centuries of sandals. Somewhere nearby, a quill scratches softly. You're inside a scriptorium, the nerve center of learning, secrecy, and, occasionally, rebellion. A monk looks up from his desk, his face illuminated by the flame of a small oil lamp. His eyes are sharp despite the hours of work behind them. Before him lies a parchment the size of a dinner tray, covered in neat black letters and illuminated with gold. He's copying scripture, but tucked between the lines. You notice a faint doodle, a cat chasing a mouse, sketched in the margin. You smile. Turns out even monks got bored. Historians still argue whether those marginal drawings were signs of suppressed humor or subtle protest. After all, copying holy texts all day can make even the most devout mind wander toward mischief. He catches you staring. "It helps me think," he murmurs, almost defensively. "The Lord made cats too, didn't he?" You nod, and he grins. Besides, the prior never looks past the first paragraph. You walk slowly past the rows of desks, the air thick with ink and dust. The monks' robes rustle like wind through dry leaves. You imagine the rhythm of their lives' bells: prayer, labor, sleep, repeat, no weekends, no breaks. But for some, this was paradise, a life safe from famine, war, and temptation. For others, it was a cage built of holy intentions. A mainstream fact. Monasteries in the Middle Ages were not just centers of faith, they were hubs of science, farming, and record-keeping. Monks brewed beer, developed herbal medicines, and mapped stars. Knowledge survived here when much of the outside world was busy burning it. Yet not every brother was content to copy what others had written. You overhear whispers of Brother Gerard, who'd been caught translating forbidden Arabic texts on astronomy. "The stars tell no lies," he'd argued. "Only our fear does." The abbot didn't agree. They say Gerard was sent to a remote priory afterward, where the skies were clearer and lonelier. You step into the cloister garden, where silence blooms louder than bells. The monks tend herbs in careful rosace, lavender, wormwood, and something that smells suspiciously bitter. For the liver, one tells you, without looking up. You notice how his fingers tremble slightly as he ties the stems together. And for spirits, he adds softly, glancing toward the chapel. Both kinds. Fringe tidbit. Some monasteries brewed a special tonic called aqua vita. The water of life, it was basically early distilled alcohol, used as medicine. And occasionally for morale. You picture the brothers sneaking a sip under the guise of treating spiritual fatigue. You can almost hear the chuckle echoing through the centuries. You pass the refectory next, where long wooden tables stand ready for the midday meal. The rule of silence holds here too, no talking. Only the sound of spoons against bowls and the low voice of a reader reciting holy texts from a pulpit. You watch as the monks eat lentil soup and dark bread, chewing slowly, eyes fixed ahead. It's not exactly a feast, but it's orderly, almost hypnotic. And yet, beneath the order, there's tension. One monk's gaze flicks toward another across the tabbola, flash of disapproval, or maybe jealousy. Even in a house of God, envy lingers like smoke. Historians still argue whether strict rules of silence preserved discipline or simply trapped resentment. You suspect both are true. Later, in the chapter house, the brothers gather in a circle to confess faults. The room feels heavy with honesty, or something close to it. One admits to oversleeping during prayer. Another confesses to breaking a quill out of frustration. Then a third stands, his voice shaking. I took an extra portion of bread. The silence that follows is longer than any prayer. The prior nods gravely. Do better, he says simply. Forgiveness is both merciful and terrifying here. You wander outside, drawn by the sound of chanting. The church stands at the heart of the complex, its tower rising like a finger pointing toward heaven. Inside, the monks sing in deep, layered harmony. The sound wraps around you, ancient, pure, unashamedly human. You don't need to know Latin to feel it. It vibrates in your bones, like a heartbeat too big for the body that holds it. As you listen, you notice something else. Faint echoes from the corners of the chapel. As if other voices are joining in ghosts of prayers that never stopped. The acoustics of these places were deliberate, built to blur the line between mortal and divine. When you sing here, you sound infinite. You sit on a stone bench, feeling the cool seep into your skin. The chant fades, replaced by the steady ticking of dripping water somewhere in the shadows. You think about how many centuries this sound has repeated, unchanged. It's almost comforting. But monasteries weren't all peace and parchment. Secrets hid in their shadows. Some brothers, forbidden from the world, found ways to reach it through coded letters or smuggled manuscripts. Others broke vows in more human ways: love, greed, despair. You hear one whispered story of a nun who fled her convent disguised as a pilgrim, leaving behind a note that said only, "God knows my heart better than you do." No one ever found her. You stroll past the library door, locked, of course. The smell of parchment drifts through the keyhole. Inside rests books bound in leather, chained to desks so they can't wander. You wonder what knowledge hides in there. Theology, medicine, maps of stars, no longer visible. Perhaps a few banned texts tucked behind a false panel, waiting for the right reader. Historians still argue whether the church suppressed knowledge or preserved it. The truth is complicated. These walls protected wisdom from destruction, but they also decided who could access it. You think of all the hands that never turned those pages simply because they weren't allowed to. As evening falls, the monks gather again for vespers. Candles line the altar, their flames small and steady. The chant rises once more, softer now, like a lullaby for the weary. You close your eyes and let it carry you. When the prayers end, the monastery sinks into silence once more. The brothers drift back to their small stone rooms with wooden beds and straw mattresses. You peek into one. On the wall hangs a single cross, carved roughly but with care. Beside it, a candle burns low, casting trembling shadows that look like wings. You sit for a while in the corridor, listening to the night breathes through the cloister arches. Somewhere, a page turns. Somewhere else, a bell tolls for Compline, the final prayer before sleep. You realize how carefully time is measured here. Every hour accounted for. Every moment sanctified. It's a life both comforting and claustrophobic, where meaning is built through repetition. And yet, despite all this order, chaos still hums faintly under the surface. You think of the hidden doodles in sacred books, the smuggled texts, the secret dreams that never made it into confession. The Middle Ages loved rules, but they loved breaking them too, quietly, beautifully. You glance toward the stars through a high window. The same sky Brother Gerard once charted stretches above you, vast, indifferent, patient. You imagine him out there somewhere, shivering but unrepentant, tracing constellations with ink-stained fingers. You smile. Some rebellions are too small for history books, but too loud for silence. The monastery bell rings again, 3 slow notes that echo long after the sound fades. You stand and start toward the gate. The brothers won't notice your absence. To them, you were never here. But part of you wants to linger just a bit longer to watch the candlelight fade one flame at a time. As you walk through the courtyard, you catch sight of a stray cat curled on the steps, licking its paw. Maybe it's the same one doodled in that monk's margins centuries ago. Maybe it's just what cats always were, survivors. It looks up at you, unimpressed, then closes its eyes again. The gate creaks open, and the cool night rushes in. Behind you, the chant begins once more, soft as breath, as if the stones themselves are praying. Ahead lies darkness, and beyond that, the wider world, the noise, the filth, the laughter, the sin. You take one last look at the glowing windows, then step into the road, the faint scent of ink and candle smoke trailing after you. Somewhere in your pocket, the herb charm from the market still rests, warm against your palm. You wonder what the monks would think of its sacrilege, or faith in disguise. Either way, you keep it. Because even after a night in holy walls, the world outside still needs a little magic. The road stretches beyond the monastery walls, cutting through fields mottled with mist and dew. You follow the faint smell of smoke and bread until the horizon widens into farmland humble cottages. Crouched low against the wind, smoke curling from crooked chimneys. Here, life beats slower, but harder. You've entered the world of peasants, the backbone of the Middle Ages, and also its most invisible souls. The sound of a distant rooster splits the quiet, though the sun's barely up. You hear it answered by another, and another, until the whole valley feels alive with voices. A woman steps out of a cottage, shawl pulled tight, and starts scattering grain to impatient chickens. Her hands move quickly, efficiently. No luxury of lingering here. Every moment matters because daylight itself is a tool, one that must be used before the dark swallows it again. You pass a man bent over in the fields, a wooden hoe biting into the soil. His breath comes in white puffs. He doesn't glance up, but when he does, it gives you the faintest nod, the kind given between people who understand survival doesn't allow for small talk. You realize he's not working his own land. Few peasants do. The soil belongs to the Lord. The crops belong to the tithe. The only thing that's truly his is the ache in his back. A mainstream fact. Most medieval peasants worked under a manorial system, obligated to labor for their lord in exchange for protection and small strips of land to grow food for themselves. Protection, of course, is a relative term. When bandits came or famine hit, divine providence was often the only soldier on their side. You pause to watch a group of women washing clothes by a stream. They talk as they scrub, their laughter bright and raw. The miller's wife dyed her hair again. One says, "with onion skins." The others giggle. Gossip here is currency, a form of soft rebellion against the monotony. You hear snippets of superstition woven through their conversation, warnings not to sing after sunset, lest the fairies mistake it for an invitation. Fringe tidbit. In some villages, it was believed that leaving your laundry out overnight could attract wandering spirits who'd wear your clothes and leave illness in return. Practical or paranoid? Hard to tell, but you notice none of the women risk it. You crouch near one woman whose hands are cracked from cold water. "You ever get tired?" you ask softly. She glances at you with a dry smile. Of what? Working or waking up? There's humor in her tone, but it depths to an unspoken understanding that rest isn't a luxury peasants can afford. "Sleep's for saints," she adds. "We've got mud." She wrings out a shirt, the water running brown, then clear. You can't help admiring her strength. In a world where nobility wrote the records, people like her wrote history with their hands. By mid-morning, the village is fully awake. The air fills with the clatter of tools, the barking of dogs, and the rhythmic thunk of axes splitting wood. Smoke rises from thatched roofs, carrying the scent of boiled cabbage and something earthy. It's not unpleasant, just honest. You wander toward a small square, where a crowd's gathering around an elderly man seated on an overturned bucket. He's carving wood, his knife flashing in the sunlight. "The saints are busy," he says to the children gathered around him. But the spirits of the forest still listen. His voice is raspy, full of rhythm. You realize he's telling a story one about a talking wolf who bargains with a farmer to spare his sheep. Historians still argue whether oral storytelling kept pagan traditions alive or simply gave people hope in a hard world. You whisper to yourself, maybe both. The old man finishes with a grin, and the wolf, children, was never seen again because he found better company among men. The kids burst out laughing, and you can't help joining in. You move on, past small gardens fenced with sticks. Herbs grow here to yarrow for wounds, thyme for courage, mint for everything else. You see an old woman collecting nettles, her back curved like a question mark. "They sting now," she tells you, "but boil them, and they'll thank you." Her fingertips are red and rough, but her voice is steady. She doesn't need books. She carries generations of trial and error in her memory. You ask how she knows what plants heal and what plants harm. She shrugs. You learn quick when you've only got one body to test on. Then she chuckles a low, knowing laugh that sounds older than time. By noon, the heat turns, the air thick, and the field workers retreat for bread and ale. The meal is simple: rye loaves, hard cheese, onions, and maybe a few pickled vegetables if luck's good. They eat sitting in the dirt, sharing without counting. Conversation drifts from the weather to taxes to rumors of a night scene passing through last week. "He looked lost," one says, or just rich enough to pretend. Laughter ripples. Someone pulls out a small wooden flute and plays a tune that sounds like sunlight on water, sweet, lilting, and a little melancholy. Music here isn't performance, it's memory. Each note carries a story that has no parchment to rest on. The afternoon stretches long and heavy. You feel the exhaustion that clings to every gesture. A mother cradles her baby while churning butter with one hand. A boy drives geese toward the marsh, calling out words that might be commands or just habit. Life moves in loops, small circles of labor and love that somehow keep turning, even when everything else feels broken. You notice how humor survives here, too, stubborn as a weed. A man wipes sweat from his brow and mutters, "God made rain to keep lords from visiting." Another replies, "And may he make it rain every week." The laughter that follows is tired, but real. As the sun begins to tilt westward, the peasants return to their cottages. Inside, you find a family gathered around a low table. The father mends a tool while the mother ladles stew from a blackened pot. The smell fills the tiny space: turnips, barley, a hint of salted meat. You sit quietly as they eat. The youngest child offers you a piece of bread, and though it's rough and dry, it feels like a feast. There's a small crucifix on the wall, carved from wood. Next to it hangs a sprig of dried herbs, probably for protection. Religion here isn't abstract. It's practical, stitched into survival. God guards the soul, herbs guard the door. You can almost hear the silent deal between the two. After dinner, the father pulls out a small board with lines carved into it. Fox and geese, he says. A simple game, but he plays it like strategy could change fate. The mother watches, spinning wool with steady hands. The child falls asleep mid-laugh, head against her arm. The fire crackles softly. Outside, the wind howls through the thatch. But inside, it's warm just enough to forget the cold waiting at the edges of the world. You realize this? Right here is the unseen brilliance of the Middle Ages. Not castles or crowns, but the stubborn rhythm of ordinary lives. A fringe belief slips back into your mind how some villagers thought household spirits lived in the hearth, invisible protectors that demanded respect. You glance at the flames, half expecting to see a flicker shaped like a face. Nothing but the warmth feels watchful, as if acknowledging your thought. The father speaks suddenly, voice low. "You're not from here, are you?" You shake your head. He nods once, unsurprised. Then remember what you saw. People like us don't get painted in churches. His words land softly, but stay heavy in your chest. When the fire dies down, you step outside. The village lies quiet under the stars, roofs glinting with frost. Somewhere a dog barks, and a baby answers with a wail. You look toward the manor on the hill, its windows glowing faintly. The distance between those two lights, one grand, one humble, feels immeasurable. Yet somehow, they belong to the same world. You start walking back down the road, the earth soft under your feet. Behind you, the faint laughter of the villagers lingers, mingled with the rustle of the fields. You think of the woman by the stream, the old man telling stories, the herb gatherer with nettle-stung hands. They'll never make it into chronicles or stained glass, but they are the quiet architects of everything that lasts. As the horizon swallows the last embers of dusk, you realize the truth beneath the legends. Kingdoms rise and fall, but the world keeps running on bread, laughter, and the courage to get up one more morning. Night falls heavier the closer you get to the manor. The air thickens with wood smoke and the faint metallic scent of iron blacksmiths finishing their work before supper. Guards polishing their swords beneath torchlight. You pass the wooden gate where the road curls upward toward a castle that isn't as grand as the tales say. But it's tall enough to make the stars blink behind its battlements. You climb the slope, your boots sinking into the mud left by cartwheels. The flicker of torches ahead outlines figures on patrol, cloaks stirring like restless shadows. The castle stands above you like a sleeping beast, stone walls, rough and uneven, banners drooping in the wind. You can almost hear it breathing through the cracks in its ancient bones. Inside, the world changes. The air smells of tallow candles, roasted meat, and wet wool. A servant girl rushes past, carrying a silver basin, almost tripping over your foot. "Watch yourself," she mutters, not rudely, just too tired for courtesy. Her apron stained, her hair pinned up in defiance of gravity. For all its supposed glamour, life behind castle walls is built on exhaustion. You step into the great hall. The ceiling stretches upward into shadow, and tapestries hang heavy with the dust of generations. The hearth blazes at one end, and above it, the family crest glares down a lion, or maybe a dragon, its eyes sewn with colored thread that glints when you move. Beneath it sits the Lord, a man in his 40s with a beard that tries too hard to impress. His wife sits beside him, her face calm and practiced. Nobility, you notice, wears its dignity like armor. It gleams, but it's heavy. The feast is underway. Platters of meat and bread clutter the table, alongside trenchers thick slabs of stale bread used as plates. Servants hover like ghosts, refilling cups and sweeping crumbs before they can fall. You take a seat near the back, among the lower-ranking household members. Scribes, stable hands, maybe a visiting minstrel. Everyone's trying to look invisible, except the jester. He's impossible to ignore. The jester leaps onto a bench, bells on his hat jingling. "A toast," he cries, wobbling dangerously. "To our Lord may his arrows always hit, even when aimed at the truth." There's a ripple of laughter, nervous but genuine. The Lord narrows his eyes, unsure whether to laugh or glare. Humor here is a blade balanced on its edge. Mainstream fact: in medieval courts, jesters often held unique protection. They could mock the powerful under the guise of entertainment, a privilege that blurred the line between comedy and survival. Still, that protection was only as strong as the Lord's patience. The jester jumps down beside you. "You've got the look of someone who knows how to keep secrets," he whispers. "Good. This place runs on them." Then he's gone again, twirling toward the days. You glance up at the Lord's wife. She hides her expression behind a goblet, but her eyes follow the jester a moment too long. You shift your gaze and catch the steward's sharp, hawk-like man, whose smile is as thin as parchment. "Careful where you look," he says softly. Some things in this castle prefer to stay unseen. Later, as the feast winds down, you slip into the quieter corridors. Candles sputter in iron sconces, throwing long shadows that stretch across tapestries depicting heroic battles. But behind each heroic face, you imagine the real story: the bribes, the betrayals, the whispered prayers before dawn. You hear footsteps echoing from around a corner, a lady's slippered stride, quick and nervous. You peek and see her hand a folded letter to a young knight, his armor half-polished, his expression too tender for mere duty. Their hands brush, and the air between them sparks like flint. He tucks the letter under his belt, bows stiffly, and disappears into the dark. A fringe tidbit: historians once uncovered hidden love notes between noblewomen and knights, written in coded French and tucked behind altar cloths. One even used the language of chess to disguise passion. "Your rook moves too close to my queen." You linger by a window, watching moonlight spill across the courtyard. Somewhere below, you hear a stable hand humming. Life below and above these walls are stitched together, yet never touch. You make your way toward the servant quarters. The air grows warmer, the walls lower. Laughter filters through the door rough. Genuine laughter. You push it open and find a dozen servants sitting around a single candle, passing a jug of ale. They hush for a moment. Then one says, "Sit, stranger. You look thirsty." You join them. The ale's sour, but it burns pleasantly. A young maid tells a story about the cook who swears the kitchen is haunted by the ghost of a goose that once escaped the spit. Another swears the Lord's youngest son sleepwalks and tries to climb the tower to meet the angels. Historians still argue whether medieval people genuinely believed in ghosts or simply used stories to make sense of the unexplained. You murmur. A servant overhears and shrugs. Who cares? Either way, they make good company when the night's long. The candle guttered low. You notice how these people, mostly unseen by history, form the real heartbeat of the castle. They know every draft, every secret passage, every scandal. If walls could talk, you think, they'd sound exactly like this room. One of them, a boy barely 16, leans close and says, "Do you want to see something?" You nod, and he grabs a lantern, motioning you to follow. Down a narrow staircase, through a wooden door, you enter a small tunnel carved into the stone. It runs beneath the great hall, he whispers. "We use it to bring food or to listen when we're not supposed to." The air is damp and smells of old wine and secrets. You hear faint voices above two nobles arguing in low tones. You catch only fragments. The dowry, bishop's favor. She knows too much. Then silence. The boy grins. Told you. The best stories never leave the cellar. He leads you back, and before you part, he hands you a small wax seal shaped like a lion. "Found it near the chapel," he says. "Might have fallen from someone important." You tuck it into your pocket, feeling the raised ridges under your fingers. It's small but heavy with implication. Later, you wander through the courtyard again. The moon hangs low, silvering the stone. You hear faint music from a tower, someone plucking a lute softly, each note trembling in the air. The melody sounds like longing, dressed up in duty. You climb the narrow stairs toward the source and find a young nobleman sitting alone, his face half in shadow. "You shouldn't be here," he says, but not unkindly. His gaze drifts out the window. "They say we're born to rule, but most days I think we're just born to wait." You ask what he's waiting for? "Something real," he says. "Something that doesn't come wrapped in a treaty." He laughs quietly. "But don't tell anyone. They prefer their princes obedient." He hands you the lute. "Play something." You strum a few hesitant chords, and he smiles faintly. Even the wrong notes sound honest when the world's asleep. By dawn, the castle stirs again. Servants scurry with buckets, guards yawn, cooks curse. You follow the smell of bread to the kitchen, where a huge woman with flour-dusted arms is barking orders. "More salt. And tell the Lord's hounds to stop stealing bones again." She eyes you suspiciously. "You're not supposed to be in here." You tell her you're just observing. "Then observe this," she says, slapping dough onto the table. History runs on bread, not crowns. You can't help but grin. Oh, she's right. The oven crackles, the first light creeping through the slats. The castle seems to sigh awake. You catch a glimpse of the lady of the house again, her face pale in the courtyard light. She's feeding crumbs to the birds, the same gentle precision as any peasant woman. For a moment, the hierarchy dissolves, and everyone is just. Human, you slip out through the postern gate, the morning chill brushing your face. Behind you, the castle looms, majestic, secretive, alive. Inside, letters lie hidden. Laughter echoes through stone, and whispers still cling to the shadows. The jester's voice drifts faintly from within. "If truth had a crown, it'd never fit." You smile. He's probably right. You walk down the slope, the mud softer now under the rising sun. Behind you, the unseen life of the castle continues, its hearts beating quietly in rhythm with the peasants below, both bound by duty and dream alike. And as the day breaks fully, you can't help thinking. Legends speak of kings and knights, but it's the shadows in their castles, the servants, the jesters, the dreamers, that tell the truest stories of all. The road carries you away from the castle's proud silhouette and into a landscape that feels older, stranger, as if it remembers things the world has tried to forget. You follow the faint smoke of a village hearth until the smell changes from wood and grain to something sharper, herbal, metallic. You realize you've wandered into the realm where medicine and magic blur, and where truth wears disguises. You pass a crooked cottage, half swallowed by ivy. The door creaks open before you even knock. "Come in," a voice says, dry as parchment. Inside, jars clutter every shelf, filled with powders, petals, and things you'd rather not identify. The air smells of rosemary and rainwater, undercut by something animal. A woman stands by the table, grinding herbs with a mortar. Her eyes flick up steady, unreadable. "You've come about a cure or a curse?" she asks. You hesitate? "Just curiosity," she smirks. "That's the most dangerous disease of all." Her name is Elfrida, and she's what some call a healer, others a witch. She gestures for you to sit. "Mind the floor," she warns. It remembers spills. The floorboards groan under your boots as you take a stool. "People come here," she continues, "when the priests can't help and the doctors won't." She scoops a pinch of powder into a bowl, stirs it with a twig. And the smell fills the room, sweet, smoky, strangely comforting. Mainstream fact: medieval medicine was a tangled web of science, superstition, and faith. Barbers performed surgeries, monks copied medical texts, and women like Elfrida mixed herbs based on recipes older than Christianity itself. The line between healer and heretic could shift overnight, depending on who got better and who didn't. She catches your glance. "You think we're dangerous?" she says, half teasing. "Only when we're right." Her laugh is low, dry, and full of mischief. "Let me show you something." She takes down a glass vial, cloudy and half full. This, she says, is distilled from frog bones. Works for fevers. You raise an eyebrow. She grins. You'd be surprised how many frogs have saved more lives than priests. You ask if she ever fears being accused of witchcraft. She shrugs. Fear wastes daylight. Then, after a pause, but yes. The church watches everything that works too well. She tells you about her friend Agnes, a midwife from a nearby village. They called her blessed when babies lived, cursed when they didn't. Her gaze drifts toward the window. They burned her last winter. Her words hang heavy in the smoke-thick air. A fringe tidbit, frog bones, toads, livers, and powdered coral were genuinely used in medieval medicine. Some prescriptions even recommended blood of a male virgin goose, a phrase that raises more questions than it answers. Elfrida sets down her pestle and motions for you to follow her outside. The forest begins just beyond the garden, and you notice bundles of herbs hanging from tree branches: yarrow, sage, and something blackened by time. The forest keeps the old ways, she murmurs. Before there were saints, there were trees. She crushes a leaf between her fingers and holds it out for you to smell. It's sharp and green, with a whisper of earth beneath. People forget, she says, that every cure begins with dirt. You walk deeper into the woods. The canopy swallows most of the light, and the ground is slick with moss. You hear water trickling somewhere nearby. Historians still argue whether medieval magic was rebellion or survival. You think aloud. Elfrida smiles faintly. Both, she says. When knowledge is forbidden, surviving becomes rebellion. A distant bell rings from the direction of the village. Curfew, she says. They don't like us wandering after dark. The air's full of devils, or so they say. She rolls her eyes. I've yet to meet one polite enough to introduce himself. You both laugh softly. The sound feels daring, almost sacred in the quiet woods. As night settles, Elfrida lights a lantern and leads you back toward her cottage. On the way, she stops near a small stream. See that? She whispers. You follow her gaze. On the bank sits a jar, half buried, sealed with wax. Someone's curse, she says. Love gone bad, or maybe land stolen. They bury it so the water carries the anger away. You crouch beside it. The jar trembles slightly, though the air is still. You're not going to open it, are you? She grins. Of course not. I'm curious, not suicidal. Back inside, she pours you a cup of something dark. It tastes like honey and iron. You should go, she says, after a moment. People don't like strangers visiting my house at night. Makes them think too much. Before you leave, she presses a small pouch into your hand. For luck, she says. And to keep the priests from dreaming about you. You laugh. Does it work? Only if you believe it doesn't, she replies. You step out into the cool night. The moon hangs low, tangled in clouds. Behind you, her window glows faintly, a lone star in the dark. You walk until the light disappears, replaced by the hum of crickets and the rustle of unseen creatures. Further along the road, you find another kind of healer, this one in the open daylight. He's an apothecary in the next town, his shop smelling like vinegar and hope. He wears spectacles, which makes him seem immediately more official. Elixirs, he announces, for every ailment except boredom. His shelves are lined with tiny bottles labeled in Latin. Mandragora, he says proudly, for sleep. Or for murder, depending on the dose. You raise an eyebrow. He winks. Dosage is everything. He gestures toward a parchment covered in diagrams of the human body. See here humors. Blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. When they're balanced, you live. When they're not, you write bad poetry. You can't tell if he's joking. Probably both. Mainstream fact, medieval medicine was based on the theory of the four humors inherited from ancient Greek thought. Illness was seen as imbalance, not invasion, so treatments aimed to restore harmony. Often through bloodletting, leeches, or purgatives. The apothecary lowers his voice. "Between us," he says, "half of what I sell is nonsense. But people need to believe their pain has a recipe." He leans closer, and sometimes belief works better than medicine. You buy a small vial of lavender oil anyway. It smells like calm bottled for emergencies. That evening, the tavern buzzes with talk of miracles and misfortunes. A peddler swears he saw a saint statue weep near the crossroads. A monk scoffs, but secretly crosses himself. Historians still argue whether such miracles were faked or genuinely believed. You think? Either way, faith made a fine business model. A young woman at the bar overhears and smiles. If you want to see something real, she leads you outside to a small shed behind the tavern. Inside hangs a collection of charms, horse teeth, feathers, and bits of mirror. For travelers, she says. They keep the road kind. Does it work? You ask. Depends on who's watching, she replies. Magic's shy round skeptics. You leave a coin and step back into the night. The stars burn bright, and the world feels older again, woven from threads of faith, science, and mischief. As you walk, you realize how human it all is. The healer in her cottage, the apothecary with his Latin. The peddlers selling charms, they're all trying to make sense of the same fragile thing. The body, the soul, the uncertainty between. By the time you reach the edge of the forest again, dawn is brushing the sky pale gold. You hear birds waking, the soft hiss of dew sliding from leaves. You pull the small pouch Elfrida gave you from your pocket and open it. Inside is a sprig of lavender and a single pebble carved with a spiral. You turn it in your palm, feeling the groove worn smooth by someone else's faith. You smile, thinking maybe that's the real magic of the Middle Ages, not the potions. Not the curses, but the simple courage to believe something unseen might still be listening. Behind you, the forest sighs in the wind. Somewhere in its depths, a lantern flickers once and goes out. The morning mist lifts like a curtain, and suddenly the road is full of movement. Wheels creak, hooves clatter. Voices rise and fade in overlapping waves of chatter. You're standing on one of the great arteries of the medieval world, a pilgrim route, trade road, and highway for wanderers of every kind. It's the Middle Ages internet, except slower and with worse shoes. You fall into step beside a group of travelers. They wear cloaks patched in a dozen colors, badges pinned to their shoulders showing scallop shells, crosses and other symbols that mark where they've been, where they hope to go. We're bound for Canterbury, one tells you proudly, or maybe Compostela if our feet survive. He grins, missing more teeth than he keeps. You coming? You shrugged, and he laughs. Then you're already halfway there. That's the trick of pilgrimage. You start walking before you know where you're going. The road feels alive. To your left, a juggler tosses apples in the air for a few coins. Ahead, a priest rides a mule that looks unimpressed with the whole affair. Children dart between the carts, chasing a stray chicken that seems determined to join the crusade. And beneath it all, a rhythm hums, a steady slap of sandals, the crunch of gravel, the occasional burst of song that makes even exhaustion sound holy. A mainstream fact: medieval pilgrimages were more than acts of devotion. They were a kind of social network. People traveled to holy sites for healing, forgiveness, or sheer adventure. Some went barefoot, others in armor. A few never came back, whether by miracle or misfortune. A woman beside you adjusts her pack and sighs. "I'm walking for my son," she says softly. "He's sick. They say the bones of St. Edmund can heal." You nod, unsure what to say. She glances at you. "You don't believe?" "I want to," you admit. She smiles faintly. "That's all belief really is, wanting hard enough." The road winds through fields and hedgerows. You pass shrines built from stacked stones and moss, each holding a candle stub or a ribbon fluttering in the wind. Pilgrims pause to whisper prayers, pressing fingers to their lips. The air feels thick with longing. By noon, you reach a roadside inn really, just a large wooden hall where travelers pay for the privilege of sharing straw and fleas. The innkeeper greets you with a grin too wide to trust. Welcome, weary souls. Roast mutton and repentance for all. You pay a few coins and squeeze onto a bench between a merchant and a jester. The jester, naturally, starts talking first. You know what the saints love most about us travelers? He says. We give them more gossip than prayers. He winks and steals a bite of the merchant's bread. Besides, I've met plenty of sinners with better manners than bishops. Everyone laughs, even the priest at the next table, though he pretends not to. Humor, you realize, travels faster than truth. A fringe tidbit. Some pilgrims carried forgery badges, tokens from holy sites they'd never visited, sold by clever merchants who understood faith, had a price tag. One London seller was once caught vending milk from the Virgin Mary, which turned out to be chalk mixed with water. The inn fills with noise and heat. A bard begins strumming a lute, singing about a knight who tried to fight death and ended up married to his scythe. It's morbidly funny, and the chorus catches on quickly. You find yourself humming along. Later that night, you lie awake on the straw, listening to the chorus of snores, coughs, and whispered prayers. Somewhere, a man mutters a confession to no one in particular. Someone else quietly weeps. It's strange, you think, how the road gathers all kinds. Sinners, saints, dreamers, and drunks, each convinced they're going somewhere sacred. The next day, you walk beside a troupe of traveling performers, jugglers, musicians, and one acrobat who insists she can balance on a galloping horse, though her bruises suggest otherwise. We bring joy, she says, or at least distraction. The lords call it sin. The peasants call it supper. She tosses you an apple. Here, payment for an audience. You catch it, take a bite, and she laughs. See, you're already part of the act. As the day stretches on, the group stops in a village square. Children gather, faces smudged and bright-eyed. The juggler flips knives. The minstrel plays a song about a bear who joined a monastery. Everyone laughs, even the stoic miller leaning on his cart. You notice how easily laughter blooms in the dirt. It's not luxury, it's survival. Historians still argue whether jesters and minstrels were tolerated or secretly feared. You muse? They could mock power with rhyme instead of rebellion. The acrobat overhears and shrugs. Fear and laughter are cousins, she says. Both make people forget who's in charge. You walk on. The road dips into a forest, the air cooling beneath the leaves. A group of merchants approaches, leading donkeys laden with barrels. They nod politely, but grip their purses tighter. Bandits, you've heard, favor this stretch of road. Ow. The silence grows tense, as if the trees themselves are holding their breath. Ow. Suddenly, a rustler figure steps from the shadows, hooded, bow in hand. Ow. Donations for the poor, he says cheerfully. The merchants freeze. And which poor would that be? One stammers. The ones holding the bow. The man replies. You half expect chaos, but instead, the leader tosses a small purse. The bandit catches it, weighs it in his palm, and smiles. Generosity suits you. Then he vanishes into the green like smoke. A fringe detail, outlaw bands often operated near pilgrim roads, but not all were villains. Some became local legends, stealing from the rich and leaving food for the poor. Real-life seeds of the Robin Hood myth. Once the danger passes, the group exhales as one. We'll call it charity, one merchant mutters, earning nervous laughter. You reach a crossroads by dusk, marked by a wooden cross, half-rotted by weather. Pilgrims kneel. Travelers toss coins into the dust. You notice a scrap of parchment nailed to the post-faded writing that reads, "No road is safe, but faith has good shoes." You grin. Somewhere, a medieval poet's ghost must be proud. That night, you sleep under the stars with a cluster of wanderers. One man tells stories of Constantinople's shining domes. Another swears he's seen mermaids near Brittany. Historians still argue whether medieval travelers believed their own tales. You whisper to yourself. But maybe that's the point. Belief is just a more colorful truth. The fire crackles. Someone passes you a cup of spiced wine. Okay. It's terrible, but it warms you anyway. The acrobat hums a tune, soft and strange, and for a moment the whole camp seems wrapped in the same dream. Dawn comes pale and reluctant. The road continues, and so do you. Somewhere along the way, you pass a small chapel built of stone and silence. Inside, the walls are covered with carvings, names, initials, please scratched by passing hands. You run your fingers over one. Pray for me. I walk for my sins. A monk sweeping the floor glances up. They all say that, he murmurs. But most walk for hope. Scene's just easier to explain. His voice echoes in the cool air, and you realize this chapel is less a church and more a confessional carved into the landscape. Outside, the road forks. One path leads east toward the sea, another west toward the hills. You stand a while, unsure which way to take. A group of pilgrims heading west waves you over. Come on, they shout. The road's kinder in company. You join them, and soon the air fills again with chatter. Someone sings a hymn out of tune. Someone else tells a joke about a monk and a goat that would definitely get you excommunicated. You laugh anyway. By late afternoon, the hills open into a view that steals your breath, a valley of patchwork fields, rivers like silver threads, and in the distance, a city glinting faintly in the sun. There, one of the pilgrims whispers, "It's a shrine." The group murmurs in awe, even those who don't believe quite enough to admit it. You realize something as you watch them. The journey itself has already become the destination. Every blister, every story, every shared loaf of bread, it's all part of the same quiet miracle. When you finally reach the city gates, the streets pulse with life. Merchants shout prices, bells toll, incense drifts from open church doors. The pilgrims drop to their knees, tears streaking faces caked in dust. One woman presses a coin to a saint's relic and whispers a thank you so raw it makes your throat tighten. You stand back, letting the sound wash over you. Maybe faith isn't about proof or perfection. Maybe it's about motion, just putting one foot after the other, even when you don't know why. As night falls, you find yourself back on the edge of the road, watching the torches flicker like constellations descending to earth. Travelers keep coming, endless and anonymous, each carrying a story no scribe will ever write. You smile, thinking of the jester, the bandit, the healer. The pilgrim mother, all threads in the same long, winding tapestry. And for the first time, you feel the weight of the Middle Ages, not as a cage, but as a heartbeat, steady, stubborn, and still echoing beneath your own. By the time you leave the pilgrim road behind, your boots feel like small torture devices designed by a particularly creative saint. But ahead lies something different, a place whispered about in taverns and scriptoria alike. A city of secrets, trades, and contradictions. You follow the river, and soon the towers of medieval Paris rise out of the haze. All uneven spires and smoke trails, like a forest built by dreamers who ran out of blueprints halfway through. The air smells like bread, fish, and ambition. Street hawkers shout over each other, selling everything from lace to leeches. Children dart between carts, chasing echoes of laughter, while scholars in long robes debate loudly about the soul of the universe next to a man selling roasted chestnuts. Welcome to the medieval city, half miracle, half mud puddle. You weave into the crowd. Cobblestones clatter beneath your steps, and the noise hits like a living thing. In one corner, a friar preaches about charity. In the next, a pickpocket demonstrates a more practical theology by liberating your coin purse. "Alms for the poor," he mutters, vanishing with a grin. You can't even be mad, it's practically civic tradition. A mainstream fact: by the 13th century, cities like Paris, London, and Florence were booming centers of trade and scholarship. The University of Paris alone attracted students from across Europe, lively, argumentative young men who probably invented the first student riots after too much mead and Aristotle. You wander through narrow alleys where walls lean in close, as if conspiring. Laundry flaps above like tired flags of truce between neighbors who probably hate each other. From an open window, you hear a lute and laughter courtiers practicing their manners for an audience that will never exist. The city never sleeps. It just changes masks. At a corner market, a woman waves you over to a stall, overflowing with powders and bottles. Elixirs, she says, eyes glinting. For love, luck, or longevity. You pick one up. Pit's contents shimmer like swamp water with dreams. Guaranteed by St. Catherine herself, she adds. You raise an eyebrow. She'll come by often. The woman grins. Only when business is slow. It's a fringe tidbit, but one grounded in truth. The line between medicine, magic, and marketing was paper thin. Apothecaries sold both real herbs and fake miracles. Some claimed to distill angel tears or dragon's blood. Most of it actually red dye or goat fat, yet people bought it anyway, because hope was the only currency that never ran out. You pass through the Rue des Lombards, the banking district, where men in fur-trimmed robes count coins faster than priests count scenes. Here, parchment contracts carry more power than swords. One merchant tells you proudly, gold travels faster than gossip. My friend Dan leaves fewer witnesses. He laughs, revealing teeth filed to sharp points. Fashion, apparently. You notice how layered the city feels? Above, the nobles live in stone houses with glass window symbols of impossible wealth. Below, the poor sleep under bridges or in doorways, clutching what warmth they can. Yet in the taverns, everyone meets in the middle. Ale makes equals of all things, at least until the bill arrives. Inside one smoky inn, a storyteller commands the room. So there I was, he declares, face to face with the devil himself, wearing a bishop's hat. The crowd roars with laughter. He winks and adds, don't tell the church. They prefer their devils invisible. It's the same old game. Humor as armor. Stories as rebellion. A drunk beside you nods sagely. Words keep you alive longer than swords. You suspect he's right. Historians still argue whether medieval urban life was liberating or suffocating. Some call it the birth of modern individuality. Others see it as a labyrinth of control guilds, taxes, curfews, and rules about where you could walk, sell, or even laugh. The truth, as usual, probably wandered somewhere in between, late for curfew and wearing borrowed boots. You make your way toward the cathedral, the city's heart, both beating and bleeding. Its towers stretch so high they almost stab the clouds, a stone prayer frozen mid-sentence. Inside, incense hangs like mist, candles flicker like tiny planets. And choirs echo through vaults that make you feel both insignificant and eternal. A monk sweeps near the altar, humming softly. You ask how many years it took to build such a place. He smiles wearily. More than a lifetime, he says. Some of us carve one stone and never see the roof. But it's enough to know your piece fits the plan. That line sticks with you, the idea that faith might be architectural, built one unseen effort at a time. Outside, the square bustles again. A young scribe tries to sell you a love poem, guaranteed to melt any maiden's heart. You glance at the parchment tits. Terrible. Does it work? You ask. Only when read aloud by someone better looking, he replies cheerfully. You buy one anyway. Support the arts. Further on, you find a public bathhouse, one of the few remnants of Roman influence that survived medieval modesty. Inside, the air is thick with steam and gossip. Men and women lounge in separate pools mostly, sharing rumors about kings, popes, and plague cures. You overhear one man whisper, "They say hot water drives out evil spirits." Another answers, "So does not being married. It's surprisingly civilized, even relaxed." Cleanliness wasn't as rare as the myths suggest. Though water wasn't always pure, many townsfolk bathed weekly, especially before festivals. Monks even had bath schedules proof that even sanctity sweats. A woman beside you leans over. "You're new," she says. "You've got that look like you still think the city makes sense." You laugh softly. "Does it ever?" She shrugs. "Only if you stop looking too close." Later, you climb a hill overlooking the rooftops. The view sprawls in every direction. Church spires, smokestacks, market tents. And somewhere beyond, the slow glitter of the Seine. The whole place feels alive like a creature breathing through stone lungs. But there's another side to this life. In the shadows, you find beggars who lost everything to bad harvests or worse luck. You pass a group of lepers outside the city gate, wrapped in rags, shaking bells to warn people away. One looks up and smiles faintly. "Don't worry," he says. "We only bite on Thursdays." You smile back, ashamed of your own fear. Again, as defiance. You drop a coin into his cup. The sound rings louder than you expect. A friar passing by nods approvingly. Charity saves souls. You glance at him. "Whose?" He chuckles. "That depends who's listening." In the back streets, candlelight leaks through cracks in shutters. You hear chants from a hidden Rooma group, praying not to the saints, but to stars. Astrology flourishes here, even though the church officially calls it nonsense. Yet kings still pay astrologers handsomely. Historians still argue whether belief in the stars was faith or science, you think? But maybe it was just a medieval version of checking your horoscope before a bad day. One astrologer you meet peers at you through a brass tube filled with smoke. "You're born under Mars," she declares, and cursed with curiosity. You grin. That explains a lot. She hands you a small stone. "Keep this. It might not save you, but it will confuse your enemies." The city night deepens. You find yourself wandering toward the river again, where boatmen sing low songs that sound like they've been around since the flood. Bridges creak under your feet. Somewhere, a cat yowls a sound that feels eternal. On one bridge, a figure stands alone, cloaked and silent. You approach, half expecting danger, but he simply says, "Beautiful, isn't it?" All that chaos pretending to be civilization. His voice is soft, almost kind. "I write the city's truths," he adds, holding up an ink-stained hand. "Anonymous pamphlets. Someone must speak for the ones who can't." You nod. "Does it help?" He smiles faintly. "Sometimes, till they find me." Then he disappears into the fog. You stay there for a long while, watching the reflection of torches ripple across the black water. The city hums behind you a symphony of trade, faith, sin, and song, all stitched together by human stubbornness. It occurs to you that the Middle Ages weren't a dark age at all. They were just ... human. Messy, hungry, brilliant, fearful, and endlessly inventive. The truth behind the legends isn't shining armor or damsels in distress. Bakers up before dawn, scribes squinting over candlelight, children laughing in alleyways, and old men trying to sell wisdom for a mug of ale. As you walk away from the river, the bells of Notre Dame begin to toll. Each note rolls through the streets, bouncing off stone and smoke. You pause, letting the sound settle into your bones. Maybe you think the city is praying, not with words, but with echoes. You look back once more. Behind you, the skyline blurs into twilight. 1,000 stories whispering at once. You can almost hear them, voices rising from centuries past, still arguing, still laughing, still living in unseen corners of the Middle Ages. The city fades behind you, swallowed by hills and the wide open air. The noise, the perfume of roasting meat and tallow smoke, the laughter, it all lingers faintly. But the road ahead is quieter. You walk along a ridgeline where wind combs through the grass and the sound of your own footsteps feels almost alien. The landscape stretches before you, a patchwork of fields and forests that looks eternal, but you know better. This land isn't static, it's busy, worked, bargained over, prayed for, and occasionally stolen. You're deep in the countryside, now the beating heart of the medieval world. Most people never saw a city, never glimpsed a cathedral spire or university tower. Their lives orbited around soil, seasons, and survival. It's simple, but not dull. Every rut in the road tells a story. Every farmhouse is a chapter of someone's stubborn defiance against weather and war. A farmer waves as you pass, his face lined by the kind of sun that no prayer can soften. He's driving a wooden plow behind two oxen so slow they might still be deciding whether work is worth it. You call out, "Hard day." He laughs, showing more good humor than teeth. "They're all hard," he says, "but some end with ale." You follow him to the village at dusk. Smoke curls from thatched roofs, and the smell of stewed turnips mostly hangs in the cool air. This is where medieval life truly unfolds, quiet, repetitive, invisible to chroniclers, but loud in the rhythm of necessity. A mainstream fact: about 90% of medieval Europeans lived in rural communities like this one. Their days followed the seasons: plowing, sowing, harvesting, repairing. Work didn't stop because it was dark, stopped because you couldn't see your own hands. Inside one hut, the farmer's wife stirs a pot over an open fire. "You travel far?" she asks. You nod, and she ladles you a bowl of stew. "Then you'll eat," she insists. Talking comes after chewing. You obey. The stew tastes like smoke and gratitude. Later, the family gathers around the fire. The farmer's son pulls out a wooden flute, playing a tune both cheerful and sedan, emotional contradiction the Middle Ages perfected. His sister hums along, and for a moment the room feels suspended between centuries. You could almost believe nothing ever really changes, just the instruments. The mother tells a story about a man who tried to trick death by hiding under his bed. He didn't fool her, she says. But she gave him one more day for effort. The children laugh, even though they've heard it before. That's what stories are, for not newness, but comfort. A fringe tidbit: some medieval villages had story keepers, not priests or nobles, but ordinary people who memorized local lore: births, famines, ghost tales. They were living archives before parchment could reach everyone. Their names rarely survive, but their words do, buried in the echoes of folk songs and superstitions that still hum beneath our modern noise. Outside, the night is thick with stars. The only light besides them comes from scattered windows, each one a flicker of stubborn humanity against the dark. You sit by the fence, listening to frogs, the shuffle of livestock, and somewhere, faint singing an old tune about love, labor, and loss. You feel it vibrate through the quiet, like a heartbeat shared by the land itself. At dawn, the bells from the tiny church call everyone to prayer. The building leans slightly, as if it's tired of pretending to be straight, but it's sturdy. Inside, a priest recites Latin so softly that most parishioners simply hum along, more out of rhythm than comprehension. The faith here is practical, less about theology, more about bargaining with fate. You notice a charm nailed discreetly near the altar, an old pagan symbol of the sun. The priest pretends not to see it. Syncretism, they'd call it centuries later. Survival, they'd call it then. Historians still argue whether rural Christianity truly replaced older folk beliefs, you murmur to yourself, or whether it just gave them new costumes. After Mass, you help repair a fence that's more whole than structure. The farmer's wife hands you bread still warm from the oven. It's dense and earthy, the kind of bread that could double as a weapon in a pinch. "We don't bake fancy," she says proudly. "It's just honest." You learn that life here isn't as miserable as myths suggest. It's harsh, yes, but also full of humor. One old man insists that his cow talks to him in dreams. Another claims to have wrestled a goose for divine insight. And who won? You ask. He grins. The goose, mostly. Midday heat rolls in. You walk the fields, where reapers move in rhythm, sickles glinting. Every swing feels ritualistic. The air hums with insects and sweat. Somewhere, a woman sings a harvest song, a melody older than most castles. It's haunting and practical, equal parts gratitude and complaint. Later, you join a small festival marking the end of harvest. The villagers dance in a circle, clapping, laughing, spinning until dizziness becomes joy. A jug of cider passes from hand to hand, and someone pulls you into the dance. You stumble, but no one cares. In a world ruled by lords and famine, moments like this are rebellion disguised as celebration. A minstrel appears out of nowhere, strumming a tune about St. Dunstan catching the devil by the nose with tongs. The crowd howls with laughter. Historians still argue whether medieval humor was crude or clever, you think? But maybe both are just different words for human. As night falls again, the celebration fades into soft conversation. The villagers trade small gifts, bread, herbs, carved trinkets. They talk about weather, debts, and who might be courting whom. Life runs on small economies of kindness, patched together like the roofs above them. You sit beside the farmer's wife, watching sparks drift upward from the fire. "You'll move on tomorrow," she says. You nod. That's the way of travelers. She looks into the flames. We travel too, in our own way. Just smaller circles. She's right. You realize it's not the distance that makes a journey, it's the change it leaves behind. The next morning, you set off again. The path climbs into forested hills where the wind smells of pine and something older. You find a hermit's hut hidden among rocks, a tangle of wood and moss. The man inside looks like time forgot to collect him. "You seek truth?" he asks. You shrug. "Mostly stories," he chuckles. "Same thing, if you're patient." He gestures to a crude shelf lined with scrolls and bones. "I write what I remember. Not what happened, what mattered." A fringe tidbit here. Some hermits were indeed literate, keeping records of dreams, visions, and local events. Many of those writings vanished, dismissed as superstition. Yet some fragments survive, half sermons, half poems, like faded fingerprints of solitude. He pours you a drink that tastes suspiciously like regret and honey. "The world is louder now," he murmurs. "People think noise means meaning, but truth's a quieter creature." You nod, though part of you wonders if that's wisdom or just the sound of loneliness talking. When you leave, he gives you a small charm carved from bone. "To remind you that stories bite both ways," he says cryptically. You tuck it into your pouch. By dusk, you descend into another valley, smaller than the last, but no less alive. Smoke curls from cottages. Bells ring faintly from a monastery beyond the trees. It's peaceful, if you ignore the distant growl of thunder. You pause to watch lightning dance across the horizon. It feels fitting, nature reminding humanity who still owns the lease. The rain comes quickly, soaking you through. You find shelter under a tree, laughing because there's nothing else to do. You think of the farmer, the hermit, the laughter, the bread. All the unseen corners you've walked through. The Middle Ages weren't a story of knights and dragons, they were a mosaic of small lives, each burning briefly and brightly against the dark. As the storm passes, you walk on. The road gleams with puddles, reflecting the last blush of sunset. Somewhere behind you, laughter still echoes faintly. Ahead, the horizon opens wide, calling you toward whatever truth waits next. Half legend, half life, all human. The road stretches before you, lined with the skeletal remains of hedgerows and the glimmering silhouettes of distant hills. Dawn has yet to fully wake, and the mist clings to the fields like a secret. You trudge along, boots squelching in damp earth, feeling the rhythm of your journey in your bones. Every step is a question, every breath a small rebellion against fatigue. Yet somehow, the road keeps calling. You pass a solitary shepherd tending a flock. His staff moves like a conductor's baton, guiding the sheep through the morning fog. "Careful where you step," he warns, his voice deep and steady. The mud keeps secrets. You nod, stepping over a slick patch, wondering if the secrets he means are stones or sins. A mainstream fact: in rural medieval life, shepherds were both guardians and markers of landscape. Sheep were wealth, wool was currency, and a lost flock could ruin a household. These men and women knew every hill, every stream, every hidden path as intimately as their own hands. You move on, following a narrow lane lined with wildflowers still bowed under the weight of dew. The colors deep violet, soft yellow, fiery red remind you that even in the Middle Ages, beauty could flourish quietly alongside hardship. You pause to pick a small blossom and tuck it into your pouch. Maybe it's a charm. Maybe it's a keepsake of a world that insists on existing, even when unseen. Soon, the path bends into a dense forest. The canopy above filters the light into green and gold mosaics. The smell of pine resin mixes with damp earth. Somewhere, a bird calls a note that hangs too long, then disappears. You follow it, feeling like an intruder and a guest at once. Here, the medieval imagination comes alive. Fringe tidbit: forest spaces were both feared and revered. Folklore teemed with spirits, furies, and mischievous creatures. Travelers left offerings at crossroads or beneath ancient oaks, hoping to avoid misfortune. Some of these beliefs were cautionary tales. Some might have been genuine encounters with unexplained phenomena. You step over a fallen log and nearly stumble into a clearing where a group of charcoal burners is at work. Smoke curls lazily from their pits. The men's faces are blackened by soot, but their hands are precise, expert. One of them gestures you closer. "Charcoal makes steel," he says. "Steel makes swords, and swords make history." His tone is matter-of-fact, but you sense pride in his craft. You remember the apothecary, the healer. The jester you've crossed paths with so many lives shaped by subtle power, skill, or belief. Charcoal burners, you realize, are no different. Their labor is invisible to most, yet it fuels kingdoms and legends alike. A little further, the forest opens onto a river. Its water glints silver in the weak morning sun. Fishermen stand along the banks, nets poised. You watch them work, noting how their movements are practiced, almost ritualistic. One hauls in a fish, its scales flashing like liquid metal. He holds it up, murmuring a small prayer of thanks before tossing it into a basket. Mainstream fact: rivers were the arteries of medieval life. They provided food, transport, trade, and even sanitation, though not always effectively. Entire communities depended on their bounty and feared their unpredictability. You follow the river upstream, tracing the current. Trees bow toward the water, their reflections fractured by ripples. Somewhere in the undergrowth, a fox slinks silently, ears alert, eyes gleaming. The forest feels alive, a place where survival and story overlap. As you walk, you remember the hermit's advice: truth is quiet. You realize this stretch of road embodies that lesson. Here, the world isn't loud with markets or sermons. It whispers in rustling leaves, flowing water, and footsteps. You stumble upon a clearing where a small stone shrine stands. Moss covers the base, but a faint carving of a saint's figure is visible. A single candle burns, smoke curling upward in a spiral. You kneel briefly, offering a silent thought to those who built it and to the centuries that have passed unnoticed. Fringe tidbit: many of these minor shrines, dedicated to local saints or protective spirits, were maintained by ordinary villagers. Pilgrims might pass them without notice, yet the shrines bore witness to prayers and fears that otherwise vanish from history. Further along, you reach the ruins of a watchtower. Stones crumbled, ivy climbing their sides. Standing here, you imagine the centuries long gone, peering across the valley, alert to threats both real and imagined. You run your fingers along the moss stone and feel a heartbeat of human vigilance preserved in silence. Historians still argue whether these towers were primarily defensive or symbolic, perhaps both. Perhaps their greatest purpose was to remind people that someone, somewhere, watched over them more, at least tried to. As twilight approaches, the sky is painted in muted oranges and purples. You find a hilltop, sit, and watch the landscape stretch endlessly. Villages twinkle faintly below, smoke rising like tiny prayers. The river you followed glints silver one last time before darkness swallows it. You think of all you've seen, the healer grinding herbs in smoke-thick cottages. Pilgrims walking for faith and hope, city streets alive with commerce and rumor, the quiet resilience of rural life, and now this serene wilderness. Each element a thread, each life a stitch, together weaving a tapestry that is the unseen Middle Ages. The wind whispers through the grass. Somewhere, an owl calls. You feel the slow pulse of time, the continuity of lives lived and forgotten. It's almost impossible to separate myth from reality here. Perhaps that's the point the legends endure, because they're built from the same materials as life itself: fear, hope, humor, and small acts of courage. You sit on the hill, letting the cool air settle into your bones. The world feels both immense and intimate. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker of candle or fire is a story. And now, you are part of it too. The first stars appear. One by one, constellations take shape. They seem almost like guides, watching over travelers across centuries. You imagine all the people who've walked these roads, pausing at the same hills, listening to the same rivers, feeling the same wind. Their lives are invisible threads, but the tapestry is still whole. As night deepens, you lie back on the grass, letting your eyes adjust to the darkness. The road behind you, the villages, the cities, the forests, they all settle into memory. Somewhere beyond, centuries of life hum quietly, endlessly, like a lullaby. You close your eyes, remembering the charm Elfrida gave you. The flowers picked from fields, the stories whispered by strangers, and the songs that traveled from city to countryside. The Middle Ages were not merely a series of events, they were a living mosaic, stitched together by ordinary people striving to survive, to love, to believe, and to laugh. As sleep begins to pull at your eyelids, the world softens. The stars fade behind your closed eyes, and the distant echo of footsteps, laughter, and whispered prayers lulls you. You feel connected to the healer, the pilgrim, the jester, the hermit, and to the countless unnamed souls whose lives built this invisible tapestry. You breathe slowly, the night wrapping around you like a blanket, carrying the weight of history lightly, whispering it as a lullaby. Here, in the unseen corners, the Middle Ages are not dark or distant. They are alive, persistent, and strangely comforting.